Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. I'm Tammy Diedrich, the Managing Editor of IBM Systems Magazine Power Systems Edition, and I'm the moderator for this event. Today's webinar is sponsored by EXTOL and is titled Modernizing EDI, Best Practices for Project Planning, Migration, and Operations. Our featured speakers today are Jim O'Leary and Jeff Innes. Jim O'Leary is the Vice President of Product Strategy at EXTOL International and is an expert on strategic business and IT project planning. Jim has more than 20 years of senior and executive management experience with software companies and holds a deep understanding of current technological drivers across multiple industries. Jeff Innes is the Vice President of Customer and Product Infrastructure for EXTOL. Jeff has more than 15 years of experience as an expert problem solver, able to identify productivity issues by analyzing processes and technological capabilities. In his VP role, Jeff oversees EXTOL's customer services, customer support, education, and product management teams. Today, Jeff and Jim will share best practices for migrating to a modern EDI solution without disrupting ongoing EDI operations. And following the presentation, we will have a brief Q&A period, so please feel free to enter your questions in the question panel on your screen anytime during the presentation. Now, without further ado, thanks again for joining us today. And Jim, I'll turn the presentation over to you.
Okay, thank you, Tammy. Hi, everyone, and welcome again to our webcast on best practices for EDI modernization. Today, Jeff and I will share some best practices that we've accumulated from years of EDI migration and implementation engagements. And by their nature, best practices are circumstantial. They really just suggest ways to solve certain problems in specific contexts. So it's unlikely that everything we cover today will apply to your situation, but we hope you'll find a few ideas that will make your EDI modernization projects more successful. Before we get to the best practices, let me start by defining a few terms and highlighting some key issues. I'm going to assume that all of us have at least a basic understanding of EDI as depicted in this diagram, but I just want to take a minute to distinguish between what we call classic EDI and modern EDI. So classic EDI follows a few key conventions. The structure and contents of electronic documents mostly adhere to standards, especially EXTOL in North America and EDIFACT in other parts of the world. External communications are standardized as well, commonly using file transfer protocol, AS2, and a few other options. And documents are usually transmitted and processed in batches. But beyond those common characteristics, there's a lot of variation that we see. Some classic EDI systems offer adapters, for example, to connect directly with applications, but many don't. Some support near real-time response for time-sensitive transactions like load tenders in trucking and eligibility inquiries in healthcare, while others don't. Most require some coding for interfacing, automation, and mapping requirements. The main problem with classic EDI systems, however, is that they don't account for many non-standard and recently adopted data interchange practices, like XML documents, spreadsheets, and complex flat file documents, and web service interactions. Classic EDI solutions that were introduced many years ago also typically lack modern tooling needed for rapid partner onboarding, end-to-end automation, and self-service reporting by business departments. Now, modern EDI solutions offer a superset of classic EDI capabilities. So they support standard batch-oriented EDI, but they also support direct integration with internal and external application service and data endpoints. They support interchanges using non-standard XML, spreadsheet, and flat file formats. They support multi-step end-to-end automation of inbound, outbound, and internal business processes. They support synchronous processing of transactions that require immediate response. They provide management and governance frequently for files that are transmitted internally and externally. They provide self-service reporting and automated notifications of processing exceptions. And they provide highly productive code-free tools for rapid partner onboarding and change requests. Now, most of our new customers contact us because their existing EDI solutions no longer meet their business needs. And frequently, the primary need they tell us about is to support new partner environments. But in many cases, there's a long list of other problems standing behind that reinforce decisions to modernize. And those include things like customer service information gaps, order fulfillment errors, data rekeying overhead, and other problems that may lead to chargebacks, vendor scorecard demerits, dissatisfied customers, and other business problems. Usually, there's a disruptive business or IT event that triggers the decision to modernize. And that trigger could be a business event like a major customer contract, a new service offering, or a business model change. Or it might be an IT event like a platform or application replacement decision. Events like these can introduce requirements for new business processes, document types, and interfaces that exceed the capabilities of the current EDI solution. And that's where EDI modernization comes in. In the next 40 minutes or so, Jeff and I will be talking about the following key issues. First of all, what information should you capture as part of developing your EDI modernization plan? Secondly, why is it important to capture and manage project documents and deliverables in a shared repository? Third, what is pattern reuse and how does it reduce risk and speed migration and onboarding? Fourth, where can you find opportunities to automate reuse to deliver results even faster? And finally, what are some policies that help you avoid problems and achieve better project results? Let's move on and look at the main modernization options before we narrow our focus to migration. Now, the way a business chooses to modernize generally boils down to three options, and the first is to do nothing and live with the consequences. This really isn't a migration strategy, of course, because the requirements that argue for modernizing remain unmet. But if the consequences of inaction are minor, like having to manually process a few transactions per day, doing nothing can make sense. But over time, manual processing can become a serious business problem, so this isn't an option that most companies should choose. The second option is to augment your legacy EDI solution in one of three ways. And the first way is to invest in an off-the-shelf software or service that addresses the majority of EDI needs and to write code to address the remainder, for example, to integrate a non-standard document or two. Again, this can be a good choice if the number of exceptions is small and the rate of change is low, but as more exceptions and changes surface and the coding backlog rises, your IT organization can reach a point where it's unable to keep pace with business changes. So again, not an option that we would recommend to most companies. Now, the second augmentation option is to acquire complementary point tools as new requirements interface, like if you want to integrate web services or process spreadsheet data or exchange XML documents. And again, if the exceptions are few, this approach can make sense. But if requirements span tool boundaries, like invoking a web service as part of validating an EDI document, or if the number of exceptions means establishing and maintaining separate skill sets for each tool, then the IT costs for this kind of hybrid approach can mount quickly. The third augmentation option is to engage a third-party service to supplement your existing EDI environment. And the main advantage of service-based solutions is that they reduce the dependency on internal IT staff and can sometimes produce results faster by eliminating the impact of the learning curve. But services can also be slower to respond to ongoing change requirements and generally cost more over time than internal solutions. And unless last-mile integration is part of the agreement that you have with your service provider, they may not completely eliminate the need for internal IT. Still, a service-based approach can be a good option in the right circumstance. Now, the final option, the real modernization approach we'll be spending time on in this webinar, is to replace your classic EDI environment with a modern EDI solution. And this option presents an obvious trade-off. In order to enjoy the benefits of a single, comprehensive, modern EDI solution, you need to expend time and effort to migrate your existing EDI assets to the new environment. Let's take a look at why that trade-off might make sense. So the real question is, why would you ever want to migrate from an existing environment to a new one? Really, the advantages boil down to three things. First, you gain the benefits of living with one EDI solution instead of multiple solutions. And that means one licensing expense, one vendor support function to call, one environment to monitor and maintain, faster response to exceptions usually, and lower overall risk due to fewer moving parts in the solution. The second advantage is that you can maintain and coordinate one integration skill set, and that means higher skills availability, fewer handoffs with specialists that might delay your projects, lower training costs, and the opportunity to pool resources that might presently be dedicated to different EDI solutions. And if the modern EDI solution you choose also supports application, data, and other kinds of integration, then the benefits become even broader here. And finally, migrating to a single solution gives you the ability to reuse both tools and deliverables across all of your integration projects, so you can get more leverage from your initial and ongoing investments, including training. So if you look at all the benefits in the right-hand column of this chart and assign either hard or soft benefits to each one, you can quickly come up with a justification that argues in favor of migration. Okay, before I turn things over to Jeff, one thing I'd like to do just to sort of set the discussion is to present this simple lifecycle model we'll be using to categorize best practices. The first set of best practices pertain to the planning stage. In addition to establishing your project organization and infrastructure, planning encompasses requirements definition, asset inventories, gap analyses, reuse analysis, and other foundational tasks. Next comes the migration phase, where you develop reusable templates, define migration staging processes, and migrate trading partners to the new EDI solution. And we group the last set of best practices into a category called ongoing operations, and this includes not just managing and maintaining EDI processes, but also onboarding new partners as business needs dictate. And by the way, the tasks you see listed under the 3 stages are simply examples. The actual tasks you would need for your modernization project will depend on business and environment-specific factors. But if you'd like to see a more complete list of sample tasks, just take a look at the companion best practices white paper on the EXTOL website resource center. Okay, before I turn the floor over to you, Jeff, let's get an idea of the modernization drivers that our audience members are seeing in their organization. So, Gerald, if you would please push our first poll question. Which of the following is currently the most important EDI change driver in your business? So, if you're looking at requirements that may be beyond the capabilities of your incumbent EDI solution, or you're looking to consolidate solutions, there may be a number of different factors involved. Which of the choices that you see here best describe your situation? And we'll give you just a few seconds to answer that before we push out your responses. Okay, Gerald, that should be enough time to close the poll out, and we'll show you those results here in just a second. Jeff, while we're waiting for the results to come up, why don't I just turn it over to you, and as soon as Gerald pushes the results out, we can discuss those.
Hey, thanks, Jim. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Let's jump right into some of our planning best practices. Well, at the beginning of any project, it's always good to figure out the roles and responsibilities of the team who will be doing the work. When folks have a clear expectation for the part they're playing, they can work more efficiently and productively, and the project typically runs smoother as well from a resource perspective. Defining roles and responsibilities in this case is an exercise of enumerating the high-level tasks and deliverables and then organizing them into logical groups. So, for example, in this diagram, we show a top-down representation of the roles at the top in the bubbles and the responsibilities and deliverables right below that. This top row here consists primarily of the research, analysis, and design type functions. And so these are the kinds of roles that we see at a high level on every single kind of project. The bottom row of the roles speaks primarily to the implementation and operations type activity. Even though we have the activity organized into separate roles, it's not intended to indicate that there can only be one person per role. So commonly, one person fulfills multiple roles and functions. But on a small project where there's only one person, that person obviously is fulfilling every role. Additionally, you'll notice at the bottom left-hand corner, there's a color-coded key down there. And what we want to show by that is as you're going through the role responsibility exercise, you may identify that there are some gaps in your available skill sets. It's important to know where those gaps are. Sometimes you can eliminate the gaps based on pros and cons and things of that nature, but for those that you can't, you have to figure out how you're going to fulfill them. These are the roles and responsibilities we commonly see in a migration project, from architect to designer, tester, and right on through to the operations. Each role has a specific set of functions and deliverables essential to the success of the project. And so the key deliverable of this planning phase is an accurate role and responsibilities definition.
Hey, Jeff, before we move on, sorry to interrupt, but we do have our results from the first poll question, and I think we need to do a little bit of interpretation, at least if everybody's screen looks like mine. Some of the questions are chopped off. So let me just quickly summarize here by saying the number one answer, in answer to the question of which is the currently most important EDI change driver, number one answer was new customer or trading community requirements. Second was enterprise application changes or replacement. And then sort of tied for third were business model changes, platform migration or outsourcing plans, and skills and resource limitations. So pretty much, I think, as we would expect.
Okay, thanks, Jim. So the next thing we want to talk about in our planning best practice is using a project repository. The centralized information repository is a place where we're going to store the information we need to perform our various migration tasks. Some of this information is front-loaded. Some of it accumulates as the project progresses. The repository is a great tool. We find that sometimes this is neglected altogether, or sometimes it becomes more important than the migration project itself. And so we want to be careful to avoid both extremes. This is a tool just like any other tool, and it needs proper maintenance and care. But as a tool, it's not the final product we're going for. I just want to describe the diagram a little bit here. At EXTOL, we advocate an agile project methodology for migration projects as opposed to the classic waterfall methodology. And agile in this case means that we've broken the tasks down sufficiently so that we can build a single use case from start to finish. We demonstrate that it's viable and then apply the process repeatedly until we're finished. So we're just going to research, analyze, architect, design, build, and test just enough to prove that the solution works. So for example, if we have 200 trading partners to migrate, we'll take one trading partner that is representative of the large segment of our partners, gather the specs, design a solution, build and test it. At that point, all we have invested is the time for one trading partner. But we learned a whole lot about our process, our capabilities, and our solution. And so we take all those lessons that we learn, we apply them, we move forward with the next trading partner, and by the 200s, it's a pretty well-oiled machine. Now, back to the repository. Some of the features that can make this concept more valuable are things like security, multi-user, and versioning. Knowing that the right team has access and to when and what information is being added and changed is really helpful. There's all sorts of tools that you can use to implement this. We've seen everything between a shared network folder to version control software like Subversion or CBS. So the information you want to be capturing in here are the relevant project drivers, trading partner specs, test data, application specs, project schedules. Not only does this help you during the migration project, these are things that we have to have for that, but when you're in maintenance mode, after the system is fully online, it also gives you a baseline for when you have to make changes to maps for regression testing against the original requirements. As the project progresses, the repository will grow, and by the end, you'll have a really valuable resource. However, it takes discipline to keep it going during the project and afterward, but once you get into the habit, it seems like second nature. But the larger the team, the more important this is. However, it's still quite useful for a single person, too. In addition to your roles and responsibilities definition, you'll want to engage in a multi-level gap analysis. This is where we look objectively at our current capabilities and compare them to our current needs and what we think we'll need in the future. On the left, we have what we are currently capable of. And on the right, we have where we want to be. Typically, the goal of most projects is to add capability. So in general, the assumption is that we're going to continue what we're already doing, but also do greater things better, faster, and more efficiently. The first gap we have to look at is our integration architecture. Our existing system may only be capable of the most basic EDI requirements, like basic comms, like FTP, translation, and perhaps some auditing. Our future needs may require us to support web services, process automation, real-time integration, activity dashboard, those kinds of things. A careful and objective analysis of what we have and what we need at an architecture level is essential, as will be one of the determining factors for the kind of integration solution we choose. The second gap we have to look at is our integration deliverables. Our existing system may be limited to consuming EDI data and transforming it into a database. Our future needs, however, may require us to receive any of the common business document formats like XML, EDI, flat files, spreadsheets, and we may need to transform and route those to one or more applications instead of just a single application. We might have to send them to multiple now. And their interfaces might vary between flat file, spreadsheet, XML, and database. Additionally, during the integration activity, we may need to build statistics for business intelligence, send alerts for certain situations, and call out to web services to receive third-party data. The gaps we identify here will help us narrow down qualified solutions that can provide the details we need. And then finally, we have to look realistically at our skills gap. Do we have the team in-house to perform all the required functions we identified in our roles and responsibility exercise? An objective review of our skills coupled with the migration project requirements will help us make decisions about things like short or long-term staff augmentation, training, outsourcing, etc. Understanding where we are today and where we need to get to tomorrow helps us paint a realistic picture of the effort required to perform a migration that's going to produce the capabilities the business needs.
Okay, let me jump in here, Jeff, and ask Gerald to push our second poll question while you wrap up the additional best practices here. And just a quick comment on this question. We didn't want to ask what the most important best practice is, because really all these best practices we think are important, but instead we're asking which of the following best practices do you believe is the most underrated in terms of its contribution to migration success? And we'll give you some time to answer that question while Jeff wraps up this section. Jeff?
Thanks, Jim. So here's some additional planning best practices that we can further bring value to this planning process. First, identify opportunities to refactor outgrown business processes with a new EDI solution. Sometimes, and we all do this, we get stuck into the old way of doing things, when a slight tweak in a strategic place may really increase operational efficiency or give us a competitive advantage. Use this as an opportunity to establish test and production promotion policies. For example, we can clearly communicate that we are going to test each partner before promoting to production, and we're only going to do that when we've ensured business experts are satisfied with the test case. And when we're planning the order in which we're going to migrate our partners, we need to be strategic and thoughtful about it. If we can help it, we don't want to start or finish with our biggest trading partner. So to reduce risk to the partner and to the project, we consider starting with smaller, lower volume partners, and then gradually bring on more significant partners, and hopefully doing the biggest ones somewhere near the middle, and then finishing up with the small ones. New teams and new processes tend to start clicking by the middle of the project, so save your sensitive partners for when your team is at the top of its game. So in summary, for this planning section, a clear enumeration of rules and responsibilities, the use of an information repository, and a gap analysis between current capabilities and future needs will bring clarity to the size and scope of the migration project. It also aids in the decision-making process and gives us options.
Okay, Jeff, thanks. Let's take a quick look at the answers, the responses to our second poll question. Again, I'll have to do some interpretation here because the answers got cut off. But so the number one underestimated requirement was refactoring business processes to take advantage of modern EDI capabilities. That's something that we really didn't cover in detail here, but it is an important factor, and I'll give you a chance to comment here on that here in a second, Jeff. Number two was gap analysis for deliverables, in other words, mapping current EDI assets to a new integration model. Third was defining clear migration project roles, accountability, and expectations, tied with using a repository to manage shared documents, and the rest came in after that. Jeff, any comment about refactoring business processes?
Yeah, and that is interesting, Jim, and when you think about what's really involved there, you're not only talking about computer systems, you're also talking about processes that affect people and the way they work, and that takes a lot more collaboration and effort to try to pull those off. When the software works a certain way, but then people have to change too, and coordinating that is sometimes pretty tricky.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, let's move on to our best practices for building a solid integration solution. Early on in this phase, we want to identify opportunities to reuse our integration objects. Reinventing the wheel each time is tedious and error-prone. So one thing we want to be mindful of here is that designing for reuse is a delicate balancing act. Some say this is where the art is in designing a good solution. We want enough reusability that enables us to build common objects one time, but not so much reusability that it makes the system so complicated that it's unmaintainable. When we think about an integration solution, there are typically a lot of commonality in the business processes of receiving an EDI document, translating it, and dispatching it to the application interface. The majority of our partners will all follow the same process. However, what does change to that process is the inputs to it. So, for example, the process of receiving an EDI document and translating it and dispatching the application data for Company A is much like Company B and Company C and so on. What's different between Company A, Company B, and Company C? Usually it's just the comms, the data that we're getting in, and the maps. Now, that's an example of an inbound document. For outbound documents, the difference between Company A and Company B are just simply usually the maps and the comms to get the data to the partner. The process is usually exactly the same for all companies. We just need to supply different maps, comm adapters, those kinds of things when we have identified data for Company A or Company B. So you see on our diagram here that the green boxes are pattern-specific or opportunities for reuse, and typically those come into play when we're identifying processes. So business processes, since they are common, are excellent candidates for reuse. They're typically designed and implemented once, and then they're applied over and over again. The runtime inputs like data, maps, and comms can be supplied to the process, and there is no need to create a new process for each trading partner. So in our diagram here again, we identify those objects that we build once and reuse. We identify those in the green boxes: process templates, map dictionaries, and patterns. The blue objects here identify those things that will be specific for each partner: the routing information, schedules, maps, comms, those kinds of things. The natural byproduct of identifying reusable objects and processes is the integration patterns to which they apply. So the patterns are intended to be applied more than once, over and over again. In our previous example, the process pattern for Company A and Company B are exactly the same. The differences are the company-specific details like data, map, and comms. But once we've identified our pattern and we're looking to apply it, automation in the implementation or build-out phase can help us achieve greater levels of development, efficiency, and success. So suppose we've identified a good pattern, but it takes 10 tasks to apply the pattern between copying and renaming the maps, renaming the routes, and the comms, and that sort of thing. Well, those 10 tasks might not be too bad for 5 or 10 trading partners, but once you scale those 10 tasks out to hundreds of trading partners, it can be unnecessarily repetitive and error-prone. So automating even half of those tasks can yield significant benefits when you scale up the implementation. So for example, a customer project template may contain the integration objects common to a trading partner setup: the comms, the map, the routing, and the information. The automation tool can apply the template to the trading partner specific information and generate the integration objects with the trading partner specific information embedded in there. And from there, we only have to tweak the map, the comms, the schedules, and then finish up with testing. Automation, or automating some of the normal tasks, can reduce manual repetition errors like copy-paste issues and tedious data entry errors like entering those darn sender and receiver IDs in the ISA. Development automation applies the pattern predictably and allows the process of bringing on a trading partner to become more mechanical and predictable. The fewer manual touches that are made to the integration objects, the fewer potential errors we'll introduce into our process. While automation is very helpful at this stage, we have to be very careful not to automate or try to automate single-use processes. We're really interested in pattern-based automation here, not for single-use processes. While it might be fun to try to automate something that's single-use, fun exercise, but the time is probably better spent used on actually achieving the migration project. Building on our reuse and automated development, we couple that with a repeatable, predictable development process. Typically, the more frequently you perform an activity, the better and faster you can do it. Kind of like, washing your hands. You don't even have to think about how you do it, but you usually do it the same way every time, and your hands come out clean each time. Likewise, we carve up our migration project into small, repeatable cycles. In each cycle, we perform the same activity and produce the same deliverables. We determine a length of time for each cycle and how much we can reasonably produce in that time frame. For example, you may decide that every 2 weeks is a good length of time for your development cycle. For that cycle, you can determine that you can migrate 10 trading partners. On your first attempt through the first cycle, you may hit your mark or you may not. If you exceed it, you know how to plan for the next cycle by adding more. If you miss it, you can adjust and try to do better the next one. But really, you're learning in small increments here. You're not doing things in large batches. Additionally, the steps to migrating a trading partner need to be well-defined and repeatable. In our example diagram here, we have a predefined cycle starting with generating the trading partner-specific objects from the template. It flows right on through deployment. Taking each trading partner from inception to deployment as a whole is a good practice, as the knowledge and intelligence about the trading partner is fresh in the team's mind and closely mimics what you'll be doing after your system is fully deployed. We recommend against a process that goes through and generates all the trading partner objects, followed by customizing all the maps, followed by testing processes for all trading partners, and then finally deploying them all at the same time. We lovingly refer to that as the Big Bang approach. Those approaches, you'll find yourself spending too much time context switching between unrelated tasks, and that just costs time and causes errors. What we're really advocating here is a simple, repeatable cycle of migrating trading partners one at a time. This has proven to be more reliable, with less risk, and a higher degree of success.
Okay, Jeff, let me jump in here and let's push our third poll question out, please, Gerald. So our poll question about migration is, what do you see as the biggest challenge in migrating to a new EDI solution? Jeff, I'll turn it back to you. You can complete the summary for this section, and then we'll see what the audience thinks.
Okay, thanks, Jim. So some additional migration best practices as we're doing our project. So at the beginning, to reiterate what I mentioned on the last slide, we should conduct a full life cycle dry run or proof of concept. Following that, once we've gotten the trading partner, a single trading partner all the way through, we've proved out that our solution works, we want to follow that up with a retrospective. And a retrospective is simply a meeting to enumerate what we did well, what we did poorly, what we're going to do better next time, and some action items for improvement or the things that we need to continue to do each time. So those are really important, and we recommend that you do those at the end of each cycle even, but as you find that the more cycles that you do, the shorter your retrospective is going to be. We avoid go-live events prior to weekends, holidays, and busy seasons. So for obvious reasons, messing around with those times, even though the pressure is on to get something in quickly, can't you just do this? You find that creates a lot of stress and angry trading partners. So one of the things you can do for your migration project is you can also look to your vendor to augment your team with resources, with best practices, and with experience to shorten the learning curve to mitigate some risk and reduce your time to value.
Okay, looks like we got our poll results out, Jeff, so let me just quickly summarize those. So again, the question is, what do you see as the biggest challenge in migrating to a new EDI solution? Number one, by far, it looks like, is maintaining service levels and making migration invisible to partners. Second was migrating and re-implementing large numbers of partner connections, and you just addressed that, I think, very well with the reuse discussion. And then third is coping with limited staff resources and skills, followed by completing the migration process within your target time frame. Any thoughts on that, Jeff?
Yeah, that's not surprising to me. The project that we see where we're doing large-scale migrations, where we're slowly adding new trading partners to the new system and turning them off in the old system, that is a strategy that we've found works really well for maintaining those service levels and keeping that transition invisible to our trading partners. And so That's one of the primary reasons we advocate just moving one trading partner at a time. You can do them in blocks in your cycle, in your development cycle. You do 5 or 10 or whatever it is for you, but you always take a trading partner from inception all the way to deployment as a unit, and that really increases your success in your service level agreements and your commitments to your trading partners. Let's turn our attention to our last main point here. We've covered planning and implementation best practices. Let's move on to some operational best practices. In our day and age, we're currently being asked to do more with less, and that's typically less time. One of the things we need to deploy in our integration solution is management by exception, or what we refer to sometimes as passive monitoring. We need to configure the system to let us know when there are issues or situations that need attention. We can't totally get away from a periodic manual check of the system or active monitoring, but in order to make some more time in our day, we should configure our system to let us know when something is wrong, rather than to have to continually checking it manually. If the system is designed and is working as promised, the green light, happy path, and healthy should be the norm, but occasionally, the norm is we occasionally get exceptions. So designing our processes or projects to use a common notification scheme is essential. I'm not saying that necessarily that all processes need to use the same notification scheme, but like processes should use like notification schemes. And so here we're showing that in each process or project, we want to have some way of providing a common exception handling framework to get those notifications out to wherever they need to go. Some of the common notification schemes we see are email notification or updating an error database or an error tracking application. So when the error actually happens, some of the most basic ones is just you send an email out to let somebody know that a problem happened. But to cut down on communication with external parties, we can also at this time consider embedding notifications right inside of our integration processes. Now, obviously, great care and thoughtfulness needs to be applied here, but where it makes sense, allow the integration tool to perform some of your error resolution and communication activity. So the next best practice for operations is reuse migration templates when onboarding new trading partners. Now this diagram looks familiar. It's exactly the same as the one that we used when we were actually building out the project. So the process of bringing on a new trading partner after we're fully up and running can be the same as the process of bringing them all on board. Now by this time, if we've brought 200 or 300 trading partners across, we're really good at this process. And our management is amazed at the speed at which we can bring these new trading partners on board because we've just gone through that big process. We're now using the same process that we used to do our migration and good at it by now. So the operational activity of adding trading partners can be seen as an extension of the activity in the migration project, or we can think of it in reverse. The migration project was simply an application of the process pattern we use to bring on new trading partners as part of our daily operations. Either way, if we utilize the same process for both, we can increase our operational efficiency and velocity. At the same time, we reduce errors and mistakes.
Okay, Jeff, I'll jump in one last time here. And Gerald, let's please push our last poll, number 4, out. So we've actually grouped a number of items in this category of ongoing operations. So what we'd like to ask you in this final poll question is, where do you currently spend the most time in the activities that we grouped under this ongoing operations category? So it's everything from, sort of daily care and feeding to new partner onboarding, implementing change requests like version changes, that kind of stuff, and so on. So we'll give you about another 20 seconds or so while Jeff wraps up this section. Jeff?
Okay, thanks, Jim. So one of the things we can do to increase our operational efficiency is to delegate reporting and inquiries out to the business departments through the use of web-based or distributed dashboards. So instead of having the CSRs call you each time they're looking for their orders, give them the tool so that they can check for themselves. You'll also want to consider data retention policies. How long do those EDI orders and invoices have to stick around before we don't need them anymore? And the rules here may vary based on your industry, the document types that you trade, or your partner inquiry patterns. An important part of any legitimate operational strategy is to document and or develop processes for backup and disaster recovery. You want to give some thought to the frequency of backups, the content being backed up, and the procedures to follow for when the system comes down. And finally, this is really important, we want to review our exception handling and notification practices. So anyone who is receiving automated email notifications knows that over time you can experience what we call email fatigue. You start receiving so many emails that they lose meaning and you no longer care about them. So periodically reviewing or possibly changing our strategy here can help us get more out of our new solution. So we've covered quite a bit of information today, but I hope you guys found it helpful. All these concepts come out of our practical experience of hundreds of EDI implementation projects, and many of which fall into this migration category. So as a general recap, in your planning, you want to be honest and realistic about the requirements of your project, what the capabilities are, and where you might need help. In the migration phase, repeatable, predictable processes coupled with object reuse and automation are going to significantly contribute to timely and smooth delivery. And then finally, in operations, we want to manage by exception and reuse our good development processes from the migration phase. So thank you for allowing me to share these best practices with you, and best wishes on your migration project. Jim, back to you.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. And let's quickly review the responses from the audience for the last poll question. The question again is, where do you currently spend the most time in ongoing operations? Number one is new partner onboarding. Not surprising, depending on your industry. There's some businesses like logistics and transportation, for example, where partner churn can be quite high, and partner onboarding is very important. Second is exception handling, diagnosis, and resolution. Again, no surprise there. And then the third and fourth responses were, well, the third response was upgrading and testing EDI software, and then other. So, yeah, I don't see any surprises there. Jeff, any comments?
No, I think that's where we see most of it too. And this is where, you know, the executives at these companies and their IT managers are really interested in the speed in which they can bring new trading partners on. And, you know, that's where we leverage good development processes where we can, you know, coming through the project and doing it a certain way and trying to mimic what we actually do in our daily operations will make that process just seem like second nature. And we can really gain some velocity there and cut down on errors, and that really helps bring this trading partner more quickly.
Okay, I'll just wrap up here with a quick overview of our modern EDI solution. But before I do that, let me just remind everyone that if you have a question for Jeff or myself, please just type it into the Q&A panel in your console, and we'll get to your question shortly. We've already got a couple of good ones. So, okay, so let me just very quickly summarize what our modern EDI solution is. It's called EXTOL Business Integrator. It's depicted here. And EBI, as we call it for short, is a single middleware product and tool set for integrating external partners, on-premise applications, cloud services, and enterprise data in any combination. And it comes complete with all the components you need for business integration, including process automation engine, transformation engine, adapters for applications and data, and so on. And as an example of a modern EDI solution, it does the things that I talked about at the very beginning. It supports all integration styles and patterns in one solution, so you get the ability to use one skill set, one investment to solve multiple integration problems. It provides reuse at both the tool level and the deliverables level, as Jeff explained in great detail a few minutes ago. Provides visibility across all of your integration activities from one location. And along with that solution, we also offer services for planning, design, implementation, project management, daily operations. And that's where really all the good best practices that Jeff explained to us came from. So anyway, the result is that EBI avoids redundant overlapping middleware investments and avoids tool and skill silos that can cause not just project delays, but also complexity and additional costs. Okay, let's get to some questions here. And I'll just put up our contact information, by the way. If there are any questions that occur to you after the webinar, please just jot down our contact information as you see on the slide, and we'll be glad to get in touch with you afterward. The first question, let's see. Jeff, here's a question for you. What are the differences in migrating and onboarding partners between EDI and non-EDI cases?
Okay, Jim, I'm going to make an assumption here that by EDI we mean EXTOL or EDIFACT documents, and non-EDI being things like XML and flat file. And there is some differences for sure. The EXTOL and EDIFACT documents are very standardized, and that means that the envelope and structures and the payloads are all adhere to a very closely managed standard, and so they're more predictable. And so we can build patterns around things that are more predictable, like EXTOL and EDIFACT. For non-EDIFACT or non-EXTOL documents like flat file and XML and spreadsheets and things, we don't have that same oversight, and we typically get documents that are ad hoc, and we have to sort of treat them almost as a separate process. So migration for EDI documents is a lot more predictable, and we can make that a lot more streamlined and that more of a repeatable process. When you're talking about more ad hoc type documents, then those typically take more time. We have to analyze them a little bit. They sometimes have different constraints or requirements in the process and handling of those. Fortunately, for what we see, though, is most of our business-to-business documents is EXTOL or EDIFACT, and so the outliers typically are the non-EXTOL and non-EDIFACT type documents. But they do, as a rule of thumb, EDI EXTOL can be streamlined, pattern-based more. Ad hoc type documents take a little bit more effort to bring those in, and they're not as easy to streamline because the formats are not quite as predictable.
Okay, great. Actually, there are a couple of questions here I think I can handle, Jeff. The first one's a quick one. As IBM is sponsoring this, is EXTOL software tool separate from IBM's Enterprise Service Bus product and plugins? Yeah, the answer to that is yes. We have our own internal bus, actually, and we purposefully made the decision not to lock ourselves into any particular vendor's platform or environment. We do, however, support commonly used services like IBM DB2, for example, on IBM's platforms, but we do not, just to make it clear, we do not use their Enterprise Service Bus. The second question here, let me take this one real quick, Jeff, and there's a couple more that might be better for you. What ROI arguments do businesses use to justify the cost of migrating to a new EDI solution? Yeah, I touched on this a little bit, but it's a tough question to answer. Obviously, it's something that a lot of people struggle with because it's not an easy one. And you need to consider, it's very context dependent, but let me just sort of explain what I think are some of the most common factors in ROI justification. The easy ones are things like loss of business, right? If there's some business that you know was rightfully yours, maybe an existing customer that you couldn't, but there were some capabilities you couldn't provide, or perhaps a new customer opportunity that you couldn't land because, again, you were missing some capabilities that they required for EDI integration. Those are the, there are costs usually or revenue opportunities associated with those kinds of missed opportunities. Costs of licenses and maintenance overhead, if you have multiple integration solutions that can be replaced by a single one. There could be errors, costs of errors, for example, chargebacks from vendors that you think you could avoid if there are certain classes of errors that you could either, again, avoid or detect early enough to fix. Opportunity to amortize license costs across non-EDI integration projects. Again, there may be cases where, as part of your ROI justification, you look at not just business-to-business integration or classic EDI, but also other kinds of integration that are projects that are needed in your business that might be able to be solved with the same modern EDI solution that you choose. What else, Jeff? Any other thoughts on this?
I think you touched on most of the big ones we see there. Platform changes, where they're trying to minimize the cost of like maybe an expensive mainframe, that kind of thing. Moving to a platform like Windows or something like that. That's a big one we see.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of sort of soft benefits and some that are not soft but are very hard to justify, like training across multiple environments is something that you have to do if you don't have a single consolidated solution. That can be hard to quantify. And project handoffs, another thing that's kind of hard to quantify. Okay, here's another question for you, Jeff. And you sort of already addressed this, I think, in a way, but let me just give it to you. Our training partners force us to support a large variety of transaction types and versions. How much does that increase migration effort, especially for mapping?
Yeah, that's a good question because you see that a lot. Not every trading partner is trading the same version. If it's invoices or purchase orders, they're not all doing 4010. You get a hodgepodge of those kinds of things. Well, the good thing is that there's not a whole lot of variation between the versions, especially ones that are real close to them, like a 4010 or a 4030. There's not a whole lot of variation there, but it does affect it. I'm not sure exactly how it works in other tools, but in EXTOL's tools, we have a way of migrating. If you build a map against 4010 invoice, for example, we have a way of converting that automatically right to 4030, and what you get is a 4010 map and a 4030 map that you can use between your trading partners, and that's something that flows really, really well in our products. But that is definitely a concern. You certainly don't want to have to go through and remap the entire map from scratch just to change a version. That's when like 98 or 99% of the rules are all going to be the same. So I would say it depends on the tool here, but a tool like ours that really fits where we offer a lot of capability there to simply move between those two versions.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff. I see we're out of time. And again, Jeff and I would like to thank all of you for joining us today. We appreciate you spending taking time out of your day. And at this point, I will turn the floor back to Tammy. Tammy?
Great. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for sharing your expertise with us today. Just a quick note that we will be sending out a link early next week to a recording of today's presentation to everyone who's on the call, as well as to anyone who registered for the event but for whatever reason couldn't make it. So that concludes our webinar. Thanks so much for attending, and have a great day.